I would like to share some tips that I think are helpful for runners in regard to the use of running shoes. I know it's a pretty hot topic and a lot of people are looking for that ideal running shoe that will allow them to run successfully and without injury. But unfortunately, there is not one particular running shoe that's the best shoe for everyone. A lot of it depends really on what type of foot structure you have and how much running you do on a regular basis. One thing that does seem to hold true though in terms of what is a good quality shoe is you really sort of get what you pay for. The cheaper shoes are cheaper for a reason, and that is they don't build them with as much structure in the shoe. Makes for a lighter weight shoe, and that kind of shoe will work well if you don't do a lot of mileage, but if you're putting in regular miles, then you're better off spending a little more money getting a shoe that has a little more structure to it. And by that I also need to point out that you don't have to go out and buy a $150 shoe. There's a sort of a breaking point somewhere in the 70s and 80s where more money does not necessarily bring on better support or a better quality shoe. Now, I like to look at running shoes as falling into one of three categories. The first category is a cushion shoe, and a cushion shoe is a very lightweight shoe. It does not have a lot of control or structure to it, but for those individuals that don't need the motion control or the stability and just maybe need more cushioning, that is a nicely designed shoe for that type of foot or structure. The one problem with cushion shoes is they do wear down fairly quickly. So if you do have a cushion shoe, you probably need to replace it on a more regular basis than a structured shoe. So that's one type of shoe. Another type of shoe that is sort of opposite to that is a motion control shoe, which is a little heavier shoe, but it's a little heavier because it has built-in features that allow the shoe to control some of the excessive movement of runners' feet. Now, if you happen to have an ideal foot and you don't have a lot of extra motion that occurs when you're running, then you probably do not need to have a motion control shoe. But if you have the type of foot or ankle that has a lot of movement that is available and you suffer from some tendonitis, overuse injuries, then oftentimes that'd be a good shoe to look at. The hybrid shoe is somewhere in between those two, where there is cushioning built into the shoe in areas where you make a heel strike, but then when your foot gets level to the ground and needs to not roll too much, they have structure built into it. So I refer to it as a hybrid because it has some cushioning features but also some structured features which allow for motion control. So those are the three basic categories. And if you talk to someone at a well-established running shoe store, they should be able to help direct you toward whether you need a cushion shoe, a hybrid shoe, or a motion control shoe. Or your healthcare provider can also provide you with that type of information. That being said, the other thing that I think is important to look at when purchasing shoes is where the shoe bends and moves. When you put it through some very simple stress tests in the shoe store. With this shoe, you can see if I hold it in the front and I try to twist the heel, that there's a lot of movement side to side. So that's the type of shoe that you do not want to wear if your foot has a lot of movement, because it's just going to allow you to roll excessively. As opposed to a stiffer shoe where if you do that same test to it, you see there's not a lot of movement side to side. So that's one way of testing to see how structured the shoe is that you're looking at. Another thing to look at is if you take the shoe and you try to bend it the opposite direction that the foot moves, and if it does not bend in the middle, and you see this one isn't bending there, then that's a sign of a good, stable, structured shoe, versus this one, you see creases in the middle right underneath the arch, And that's just indication that on the bottom of the shoe, there's not a lot of stability built into the arch. Another thing you want to look at is where the shoe bends. When you try to bend it, it should bend across the widest part of the shoe rather than in the middle of the arch. And if you can take a shoe and bend it in the middle of the arch like this one does, then that's not a very stable shoe. Again, my example of a stable shoe, if I try to bend it forward, the only place it bends is up here, and I cannot bend it through the middle part or the arch. The final thing I want to mention about choice of shoes and shoe wear is the importance of replacing a shoe once it's been worn and has accumulated some miles to it. If you just look at the outside of the shoe, it may still look like it's got lots of wear left in it, but what happens with running shoes is the midsole, which is the most important part of the shoe for cushioning and control, has a tendency to pack down over repeated foot strikes and repeated mileage. So a good rule of thumb is somewhere around 350, 400 to 500 miles is about the right amount of time to think about replacing that shoe, because what has happened oftentimes is that midsole is packed down. Now, a lot of runners can sense that on their own. They know that when their knees start aching or their hips start being a little stiffer than normal, that may be an indication that they've lost some of that stability or midsole correction. So even though you've got a great shoe, you don't expect it to last for miles and miles and miles. I think you need to be aware that they need to be replaced on a timely basis.